Welcome. I know we'll probably get a few stragglers, but I thought we'd get started because I know all of you are here to hear our panel today. I'm Abby Scott. I'm the Executive Director of the MBA Career Management Group here at Berkeley Haas. I'm delighted to be here to see some friendly faces and some new faces, although I've been in my job now 10 years. We have an all-star panel here, and I'm going to introduce the facilitator here in just a moment. The panel today is the new career normal transition. So we're going to talk a little bit about how climbing the corporate ladder in the way that maybe our parents did or the generation ahead of us did is not typically the way that people have accelerated their careers more recently. So we're going to talk a little bit about some different strategies and hear some great case studies from two wonderful alums and how they have managed to get ahead while making shifts along the way. So a little bit about our facilitator, Sally Thornton, here in the lovely pink.
Keeps you awake.
Sally is the president and co-founder of Flexperience. She's a sought-after expert on issues related to top talent. She's got clients that range from Genentech, big global companies, on down to high-growth startups and creative companies like Pixar, I guess not really a startup, creative Method, Home Products, and Levi. Sally has been featured in various media, including, in fact, I first heard Sally when I was driving to work a little late one day and heard the Michael Krasny show on KQED, and Sally was there and really impressed me, along with a group of panelists talking about sort of this new world of work. She's also been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, NBC 11 News, and many more. And her company has been profiled in not only the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, but the company was listed as one of the fastest growing, 100 fastest growing private companies by the San Francisco Business Times in 2010. And rumor has it she's up to something new. So we're hopeful that she'll share a little bit about what she's planning to launch in July. So you guys can be ask the right question, and maybe she'll tell us what she's up to. By the way, Sally is going to serve as both the facilitator and a panelist. She's got a lot to share and offer, so when I turn the mic over to her in a moment, she'll probably be answering some of the questions as well as asking them. A couple more things about Sally before we get started. She's a board member of the Women's Initiative of San Francisco, and she's on the board of advisors for a couple of Silicon Valley startups, Vive Solutions and SkinnyScoop.com. So how did she get to this place? Just a couple more quick things. Prior to starting the company in 2006, she was a global compensation consultant at E&Y, and she was an HR and customer experience manager, two different roles, at Covad Communications, and she lives here locally. She's a East Bay resident, lives in Lafayette with her husband and children. So thank you, Sally, for being here, and please join me in welcoming Sally and our panelists.
Thank you. That's one of the nicest introductions I've gotten. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Because usually the only people who have ever seen me in media are my parents who watched the Wall Street Journal that one day I was in it. So, so thank you, Abby. That was very sweet. I want to introduce my co-panelists. I'm facilitating and panelized because I have more of the startup experience and they have real company experience. So Dawn Riordan, and do you say your full? You say Techie?
No.
Just Riordan.
I got married later, so.
Okay, you kept it all.
I had to keep my maiden name there somewhere.
So she is also East Bay leader. She's the GM at Pete's Coffee and Tea. How many are big fans of Pete's?
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you for that.
So she's got experience building businesses, leading initiatives across functional lines, and developing integrated marketing programs. And we were really excited about having her join because she went into a group that just didn't even exist before within digital marketing. It wasn't even, a category 10 years ago. So, so she right now is the GM of Pete's e-commerce business. She's spearheading the company's digital marketing strategy for all of the channels. Prior to joining Pete's, she spent 15 years at Gap in a variety of marketing roles. And she started her career as a media planner and buyer and worked her way up to director of media. In 1995, she switched gears and pioneered Gap's digital marketing strategy, including the launch of Gap's first websites. And she's a true blue. She went to Berkeley undergrad in polyeconomics and then got her MBA from Haas 10 years ago. So we have a 10-year alum and a 20-year Haas alum, which is pretty cool. And she's volunteering actively at Haas, which is great. So thank you for joining us. John Brennan is a managing director at Silver Lake, and he has been there since 2008. Is that right? And how do you say Silver Lake Sumeru? Is that how you say it? Sumeru, thank you. It's the firm's middle market strategy group. He has significant experience as an executive in technology companies and in strategy consulting. So we liked having that blend of background. He was at Adobe Systems, where he led the company's platform software business unit. And before that was with Hewlett-Packard as a senior vice president of small business market segment operations. Was responsible for the sales and marketing of the portfolio of products targeted to the SMB segment. So he had significant P&L experience. Before that, he spent 8 years working for Accenture Strategic Services, where he was a principal. And he's on the board of a couple firms, and I could not pronounce them.
That's all right.
But check out the bio. I'm sure you have it in your thing. And he went to Yale undergrad and Cal 20 years ago. So very exciting to have him here. So we actually were just talking before the panel, Dawn and I, just about we had such a strong response to this group. We kept getting moved into a larger and larger room. So we were just kind of curious, and it really spans the gamut in terms of recent grads to people who are running big P&Ls yourselves in the audience. So, from a transitions perspective, raise your hand if you're thinking about it as a leader. So you're in an organization and you're worried about your team's transitions, or you're wondering about hiring. You yourself are not in transition, but you're thinking about your organization. Just one. How many people are raise your hand if you are thinking about a transition? Okay, that helps us tailor our comments. So you're in the majority. Okay. So, and this is a really interactive session, so please, my style is interrupt anytime. We want to keep this, real to whatever is interesting you. So we're going to start with a little bit of the historical, and then we're going to go into the future. Love to hear their experiences and how they made decisions, and then forecast how we see transitions headed, because we're in a really, I think, big transition right now. So let's talk a little bit about what drives you. And how you thought about your inflection points within your careers within the last 10 years, maybe? Just, okay? Yeah.
Okay. I think I have to speak into this because we're being recorded.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to listen to Dean Lyons about that kind of straight line versus path bending. And earlier in my career, which is longer than 10 years, I will go back a little bit further. It was straight line. It was you start as a media planner and buyer, then you get promoted to manager, and this all happened for me pretty quickly. I was a director of media. I think it was maybe 8-9 years into my career, and then I hit a wall really, and it took some reflection on my part to say, okay, what is it that I want to do? I was very fortunate to have access to a career resource center that was in San Francisco at the time, Alumni Resources, and took a lot of time to figure out what it is that I was good at and I liked doing. And I had a lot of questions about them, what that looked like. And it was at the same time, they were putting together a task force at Gap to work on the 5-year plan and figure out how they could continue to grow the business. There's a time at Gap where they're saying, Gap is like Coke, they're not growing, they need to find new ways of driving revenue, and the team of 10 of us went off and just really were given access to everybody to figure out what was next for Gap. And I know they went through some struggles more recently, but at that time it was business changing what we came up with, the different plans. And it exposed me to so much more than just being part of the marketing department in media planning and buying, which is very specialized. And I came off that team after a year and was very fortunate that my boss said, you know what, I'm not leaving. Your next step is my job. There's no other job like this in the company. Take your head with you. Go find something to do. So I spent about 5 months looking around the company, talking to a lot of the leaders who I had met through this experience. And it was interesting that on the team of 10 people, I was the only one that had any technology background, which is kind of scary. That I was the one that get all the technology projects. Like, should we put kiosks in the stores so you can order jeans? Should we do this? Should we have email for the stores? That was revolutionary at the time. And I kept getting these projects, so I started thinking about, well, I do actually have an aptitude for this, and how can I connect business and technology? And a friend of mine was actually holed up in his office one day in the dark. His nickname's Gloom Boy. And he was working on something very intently, and I went in there and said, what are you doing? He says, Don Fisher, I think you all know Don Fisher, he wants a website. And it was very fascinating. It was in 1995. This was just emerging. And I knew Gloom Boy, Chris, very well. I said, you cannot write a project plan. You cannot do a business plan. You're very creative. You're great with technology. You need a partner on this. And I went and sold the EVP of marketing. I said, look, this is what I want to do. It took a little while and support from the executive team, but we basically went before the board, pled our case, gave them the plan, and got the funding to launch Gap.com in 1996. And it's interesting because when you think about what drove me from there, it took me kind of by surprise. We went from 10 to 30 to 350 employees within the span of about 3 years, and all of a sudden I was specialized again. And I kind of woke up one day saying, wait a second, what's going on here? And I think that's when the driver started to change for me. I started to understand a little bit more about myself, and that I was too far away from the consumer. I was too far away from the business. And I started kind of plotting my path to being a general manager, which is very hard to do at Gap if you're not a merchant. I don't know if any of you have ever worked at Gap, but merchants are the business owners, and marketing are supporting the business. And I was able to make some transitions. I campaigned to start a group called the Customer Experience to get close to the customer for the business. Then I kind of parlayed that into being little general manager of a piece of the business when Gap and Old Navy launched storefronts on Amazon. And it taught me a lot about what I liked and what I didn't like. And I think that the driver now, as I'm older, I'm a little more, I've tried a lot of different things. It's really about taking ideas and catching them. I used to think that, there's the support side of it. I don't know if you guys ever read this book by Jeffrey Moore. I never read it, but I heard him speak about it. So I'll be honest about that. But he was talking about how you need to have idea generators, you need idea catchers, and then you need people who can operationalize the heck out of things once that idea has taken hold. And I finally figured out where I played. And I think that's actually helped me guide my career since that time, leaving Gap, starting at Pete's in the retail side, knowing what I needed to do to get to where I wanted to get to. I think that kind of exploration and kind of understanding myself better has become more of the driving force, and why you'll see, if you look at my resume, wow, you've made a lot of lateral moves, why I've made those choices. So that's my story.
I like that. Thank you. So do you consider yourself now an idea generator, or are you an idea catcher?
I think I'm more of an idea catcher.
Okay.
There are plenty of ideas. Your CEO usually is like a big idea generator.
Good point.
The VP of sales, who's got ideas, I can't even answer him. I don't answer him on the weekend anymore. I'm like, that's a great idea. I'm going to wait till Monday because I'll catch it later. But I think that's a skill, and I think that Dean Lyons talked about that, and I just love, because I've been trying to articulate this. We actually have 3 open positions, so any of you guys want to look at our website? I'm sure we'll talk about the transition for my team a little bit later. But I think that when he talked about problem solving versus problem framing versus problem finding, it was one of those things I finally like, oh, that's how I can frame what I'm looking for, because I think that problem framing is a skill that not a lot of people have. And problem finding is even harder because you don't even know what you're looking for. But at the level that I'm trying to hire right now, it's like I'm having this problem where I have a lot of people that are problem solvers, but they're not problem framers. So I think I'm really good. I was definitely good in my earlier career at problem solving, but I'm actually feel if I'm how I'm an asset to Pete's right now is framing the problems. They're there. People just don't know how to get their heads around it. So I think that's a skill that I've developed over time.
I think my experience is is sounds a little less planful than yours. Which is to say, if there are two constants to the last 20 years for me, one constant has been my interest in technology. That's sort of that's why I came to California 22, 23 years ago. I was in New York working on Wall Street doing equity research, and I wrote part of the research on the IPO of Microsoft for an investment bank. And I was one of the first people to have a PC in my dorm in 1984. So there you go. And I decided I think I should go to California. And so that's a constant. And that has been a constant for me. And I think as we talk a bit about career transitions, it's important to kind of remember that there were a few things that framed my approach to managing my career. And then there was a fair amount of serendipity and taking advantage of circumstance within that. The second constant is I knew that I wanted to be a principal investor at some point in my career, and I had set that goal out for some period, 20, 25 years away from when I started. And those were really the only sort of two things that I would return to. And on occasion through this process, I would return to the idea of principal investing, and it happened that it all happened to come together 3 or 4 years ago in terms of kind of reaching that point.
I wouldn't say it happened to come together.
Well, I mean, but it's very much my philosophy that to a degree there's always a sense of chance and a sense of being in the right place at the right time for these things, and I don't dismiss that. So with those two things as sort of constants, when I left, I was in investment banking or in asset management. I was involved in evaluating technology companies, came out here, was at Haas, and I joined a consulting firm, Anderson Consulting. Again, Anderson Consulting focused specifically, again, on technology, and that was the interest in the allure for me. And Anderson Consulting had an unusually good run in the 90s because it was affiliated with and seemed to be closely affiliated with, to many of our clients, with technology, which was a benefit. And then in the mid to late 90s, I decided that I didn't want to be a partner at a consulting firm, that the lifestyle wasn't sort of what I wanted. The work was sometimes quite interesting, but the lifestyle wasn't what I wanted. I felt like it was a little too transient for me, and it wasn't just the travel. It was the transient nature of the projects themselves, not sort of having consistent ownership for a long time. And so I literally made a decision. It's time to look for a new role, and the good part about being in consulting is you're around lots of clients, and if you've done good work, you can find that transition. And I did, and I ended up working at HP. And from HP, I moved to Adobe, and that transition was quite different. Actually, it wasn't that I consciously decided that it was time for a change in company, as much as I looked around at HP at the time, which was really struggling under what I thought was poor leadership, and said, "I'm wasting my time here. This isn't, the way the decisions were being made, the competence of some of the senior team." Just wasn't where I wanted to be. And it's a time-honored Silicon Valley tradition that you can get out your sharp elbows and fight the political wars, which I suppose if you were in Detroit and there were only 3 employers, that's what you do. But here, that's not what you do. You find the next good opportunity and you move on. And so I went to Adobe Systems, and it was a fantastic ride there. And then again, sort of serendipitously in this case, 3 or 4 years ago, I was approached by some people I had gotten to know to join them in an investment fund. Silver Lake Sumero is a private equity investment fund that invests in technology companies. And I made that move to join them. So today I'm kind of, 20, 25 years ago, kind of where I wanted to be, but not because I had a particularly well thought out plan as much as I took advantage of circumstances and sort of kept making those moves. I'm happy to talk as we go further about some of the things that I think can help you put yourself in a position for those things, recognizing that you can also just have a more straightforward approach, which is to say, that's what I want, I'm going to go get it, I'm going to knock on their door until they give me a role. It doesn't always work that way. It depends on the career and the job, but I think both approaches are useful.
And actually, let's dive into it because I love that part. And I think you're so humble to say the serendipity, but I spoke with him for an hour, and there was a lot of planful, thoughtful ways that you considered it. So we're not going to be super linear. It has to be either one. But let's just keep going on that. As you thought about those roles, and some of them were lateral, or who you wanted to work for, what you wanted to do, talk a little bit about what your considerations were for each of those transitions that were pretty major for you.
Tell me more about what are you looking for?
The things that you were looking for, how you sort of went out there and said, I want to be in this role.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, my view is, and again, I don't mean to offend anybody who will tell you differently, but you need to look after your own career. Many people, when you're in a larger company, there will be an HR department who will look after your career for you. They will, in fact, look after your career if you're one of the 10 critical people at Google, or one of the 10 critical people at somewhere they absolutely cannot lose you, and you're on that very, very short list. Everybody has that very, very short list, and if you're on that very short list at any company, HP, Adobe, Google, there's no question people are looking out for you, including the CEO and the senior people who, quite frankly, feel like you're indispensable. But if you're not among that 10 to 20, and there may be lots of reasons why you're not, maybe just because you are incredibly important but you're not recognized, then I think you have to manage it yourself. And therein lies, I think, the real challenge in managing a career both inside a company and moving between companies. And my own experience, for what it's worth, is that I had concluded that coming out of consulting that I needed to be in a line operating role, like Don was talking about, that in order to kind of have the experience and the experience base and the types of skills that would ultimately make me a better investor, better principal investor, that I needed to run businesses, large, complex businesses. And so this was a transition. When I went to HP, I actually joined as the head of corporate development and mergers and acquisitions. That was what I had done a fair amount of at Accenture and was able to position myself, and they were very comfortable with me in that role. So then how do you make that move? How do you make that move internally to a company? How do you end up running a business? And in my case, I have decided that a good way of managing your career is to tell people that that's what you want. And so after some period of time in any one of these companies, my strategy has always been to say to somebody, usually the CEO, this is the job that I believe I need and I will have in the next 24 months or 18 months, whatever that time frame is, and I'd love your help getting that job. I'd like your support getting that job. And by the way, being kind of clear about the fact that I'll have that job whether it's here or somewhere else. So there's a risk element to that, but I've never found it not to work. And I have two kind of perspectives on that. One is, after what can be an awkward meeting, for the most part, good CEOs and good business leaders like people who are a little bit aggressive. They like people who know where they want to go. And so telling people that you have a plan is something that people, frankly, after they recover from the meeting, if they felt defensive in the meeting, actually really, they really like that. And it works out in most cases. And so that's a very important, I think, skill. Now, there's an important thing to say there, and I've been on both sides of this. No one likes having a gun held to their head. So you can't say, give me the job or I'm leaving. And so there's an issue of time frame. And so I've always kind of said, I need to be doing this in 18 months. That happens to be a time frame that makes no one nervous. No one feels pressed. No one feels cornered. Instead, they feel like they're your mentor, your coach, your supporter, as opposed to, holy cow, this person's sticking me up for a role, and that makes people feel awkward. And so you have to calibrate it. If you do it wrong, people are really uncomfortable, and you're seen as holding hostage. So.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting for me. I think we had this conversation when we first spoke about this panel. Is that I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I didn't have this kind of this is where I wanted to go, and it's that exploration of trying to figure that out that can be tough because you can't go into somebody and say this is where I want to be in 18, 24 months if you don't know what that is. So I think one of the things that helped me was actually asking others what I was good at. And you know, people I respect sometimes within the company. It can be a little risky because they're like, "Why are you asking?" But if you can ask in a way of saying, "You know, I really want to be a better partner. You know, what am I really good at?" But then also reaching out to people I'd worked before with as mentors and saying, "You know, what am I good at?" And also talking to those people, it's like, "You're a general manager. You used to be in marketing. What do you like? What do you not like?" And just putting yourself out there and kind of exploring what it is that you want. And I'm actually a general manager and the head of digital marketing, and in many companies those are two roles. And the CEO looks at me every day like, I don't know what to do with you. You should be reporting into the VP of sales because you're a business, but then you're a marketer, and we don't have a CMO. So he was like, I don't know, you just report to me. And I think that there might become a point in my career where I have to choose. And you know, the GM is very broad. You have a lot of responsibilities across different areas, one of which is marketing, versus marketing, which I love, is very it's very different. It's a very different skill set. It's a very different kind of mindset you have around the business, and that's something I'm still exploring. And I have, even though I've only been in the role a year, and I think this is kind of this idea of looking ahead, I'm back out there. And I'm talking to people. I'm talking to recruiters I worked with when I landed at Pete's and saying, what are you seeing out there? What's happening? I actually was in retail marketing when I started at Pete's because I wanted to be a brand manager. I don't know if anybody of you guys are marketing. It's very hard to be a brand manager if you did not come up from Clorox, P&G, Kraft, any of those companies. Very, very hard to do it, which I found out. So I decided to then target companies who had CPG leaders, people who kind of ran their business like a CPG company, which, by the way, Pete's doesn't. I learned that after getting in to the company. But it's just one of those things, like I had to figure out how to get those skills because at Gap, I didn't have the P&L responsibility. And job after job, this is one of those things I probably shouldn't say in front of a camera, but I interviewed with 34 companies between leaving Gap and joining Pete's. And a lot of it was expert. It was kind of insane. I don't recommend it to anybody, but a lot of it was trying to figure out am I going to be a hedgehog? Am I going to be out there and do what I'm really good at in product management? Because that was most of my career at Gap Inc. Direct, which is their online division. The longest piece of that was being a product manager and heading that group. Do I want to do that and be really good at that and probably would be much more senior, or do I want to pursue what I think is going to make me happy, which is I'm a systems thinker, not a technology systems thinker. I like to see things from end to end, and that's what being a general manager is all about. So I think that by going out there and exploring all these things, I figured that out, and I was able to convince the people at Pete's. I listened to them. That's the other thing in interviewing. I went on a lot of interviews. So if there's an interviewing panel, I can definitely help out on that. Really good at it. But I was really listening, and something that the recruiter said to me was, wow, that's my in. And I used my Haas network, a little plug there. I talked to somebody who had been a former employee, someone who was currently in there that I met through my Haas network. I was like, what are the problems they're trying to solve? And I got in because they were trying to codify processes around marketing, not because I had a CPG background. I just hit a chord with the hiring manager who said, oh my gosh, you can help me. You can help me figure out how to manage all this work we're trying to get done. And that was my in. I spent 4 years in retail, and then I hit a wall again. And I had to make a decision. I leave and pursue my dream of being this brand manager now, or I try to find a job within that was a little bit more, had a larger how do I explain? It can help me continue to grow. So I went back out there. I actually went to the same person who helped me get into Pete's. I said, look, these are the jobs I'm seeing. If you were the VP of this group, if you were the president of this company, would you hire me? And they said no. And that was really tough for me to say, you know what? They said, Dawn, people with 20 years of CPG experience are applying for these jobs, and they're not getting them. I talked to a recruiter. I'm placing people with CPG experience in e-commerce roles. So you should think about this. Think about where your future is with, you don't want to leave the Bay Area. You love it here, partly because of the Cal Bears. But I grew up here, I went to school here, my whole life is here. And you're limiting yourself because you know there are not a lot of CPG companies here. And there are a lot of small companies like Cliff Bar and Numi Teas and things like that, but there are a lot of CPG people here looking for those jobs. So I made a decision a year ago, actually a year and a half ago, to start pursuing e-commerce again, knowing that I had a better shot now that I had that P&L experience to get a general manager position. And this is another kind of tip that I didn't see before. I used to think, work hard, you will get recognized, you will get promoted. Then I realized that no, you still have to work hard, but you have to work smart. And I had been taking on work that I probably shouldn't have for another division, just trying to help them out and kind of brainstorming with them because it was a very small team, and it was the general manager of the e-commerce channel. And when he decided to leave, he recommended me for the job. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, she's from retail. I'm like, wait, guys, 8 years of experience running websites, but I hadn't had that general manager experience. But because I had kind of built those relationships, so the idea of the relationships outside your division, very important, I was able to get the job as general manager, which I love. But again, I don't know where it's going to lead me. And I don't know, do I want to be a general manager or president of a division, or do I want to go marketing? And I think that's something I'm still struggling with today.
Well, I think some of those, lateral moves that you've alluded to are really critical too, because it's not like you just there's a GM path, right? There requires skills in multiple categories to get that. How many people have running a business, some sort of P&L in their goals? How many people? That's not as many as I thought. How many people have the entrepreneurial path in their goals? It's kind of equal. Okay, I'll just speak quickly then a little bit to the entrepreneurial. So I started my own firm and then also do recruiting. So I work with a lot of startups to find top talent. And I think the entrepreneurial thing is pretty awesome. But of course I've opted into it, so I'm a little bit biased. But the concept of, find what, I love the Pandora story. I mean, he's just like the true entrepreneur because he, really went hard and really took a lot of risk. But, generally, it's more about just finding that need, seeing where there's an opportunity. So for me, it was looking and seeing how amazing talent was all over the Bay Area, and either found this binary equation of we either work 80 hours a week or we stay home, or we go get a PhD, or but it was just kind of on or off. And I found a lot of working moms. I was on the peninsula at the time, who were Harvard MBAs, Stanford MBAs, Haas MBAs, who were pretty frustrated. So I decided to start a firm that would be sort of that interim executive. And I had some amazing clients who immediately said, even though you're a startup and I've never heard of you before, I'm in, right? They want top talent, and they want them any way they can get them. So that's how I started. I looked and saw the need. I was that demographic. I was someone who actually wanted to see my kids occasionally, so they're really mad I'm here on a Saturday. So they're like, wait a minute, what's your job all about? Seeing us. So, I wanted that flexibility, but it was because I wanted to do the job I loved, and I wanted to, live a life where I would have that sort of no regrets thing, which a lot of entrepreneurs I found have been sort of incredibly idealistic. So it works well for me. So anyway, the entrepreneurial path for me was very, I would say easy, because it's like immediately I saw a need, immediately I went out, I tested it, and clients responded. So, I find that there's a lot of different paths in how people sort of branch off and do their own thing. But, testing it, and also parallel pathing. I find a lot of entrepreneurs will seed an idea while they're getting paid. And so they'll be in a job and, start to talk to clients, especially if it's, not competitive, then you can feel really good about it. and test out your ideas. So that's another common thing I see. And in fact, a lot of the consultants that came on to my firm were, left their 80-hour-a-week job and said, if I only worked 40 hours as a flexible consultant, then the other 40 hours of my life, I could start my other firm. So sometimes the consulting lifestyle actually let people germinate their ideas in a little bit more of a safe environment than 11 maxed out credit cards and chest pains in the ER from Pandora guy. So I want to keep going on sort of the transitions and talk about the laterals and the step backs, but any questions that came up just from so far where we are? Because I'd love to keep it interactive.
So just from a transition perspective, like say you're in a company, you're doing well, but you come up with a business idea, right? So you want to go execute that. You've seeded it, you think it's going to work, so you go execute that. And say you need to go back into the workforce for whatever reason, because for financial reasons, let's say.
Yeah, that would be
right?
good.
Because while this idea is still building up, you want to do something, right? You want to get back into the corporate ladder. How do you make that transition work? I mean, are you looked at like someone who's totally overqualified because now you went and started a company, but now you're trying to, get a job in, let's say, marketing or business development or whatever? Does it work against you?
Well, I'd love to hear their perspective too. I'll tell you the recruiter perspective, and then they can tell you the hiring manager perspective. But this kind of goes a little bit to what I think the dean was saying too about taking risks, right? So if your resume shows, you took time off, or you tried to start an idea, and maybe it was mediocre, maybe it was failed, whatever. As long as you, learn something interesting from it. I have found that the companies who are looking at the resumes I send them generally like the risk takers. I work with IDEO, and they're all about fail fast, fail often. So a lot of it's culture fit. Maybe if you're going into certain organizations that sort of have the, we like it a certain way, then that's not going to work for you. But for other companies, a lot of it is how do you market yourself? How do you tell the story of what you did? That I've seen from a recruiter perspective, but these guys actually hire. So,
I think in the Bay Area, for the culture that we're in, that it's almost never held against you. I think if what you communicate is that you went after something and tried to do it, and it didn't work, or it hasn't worked yet, and that you need to re-enter the more formal workforce, it's not held against you. When I was here 20 years ago, Scott McNeely, who was the former founder, CEO of Sun, came and he did a panel. And one of our classmates raised his hand and said, I've tried 2 startups, and each one for a year and a half, and they both failed. Would you hold it against me? And Scott actually said, no, you'd actually be the first person in this room that I've hired, because you've got the scar tissue and you understand how much it is. Now, that's a glib thing to say for him, but nevertheless, I think in the Bay Area anyway, there's not really a cultural issue there. Now, what you have to convince them, though, is that your heart and soul will be in the job that you're willing to accept, and that you're not going to be kind of half-timing it, because that won't be attractive to them, and there are plenty of people who will put their heart and soul into it. I think, though, if you're talking about marketing yourself in these transitions, 2 things that I think are really important to demonstrate are competence in your current role. And this is going to be an odd thing to say to a career management panel, but people who are all about managing their career super actively, like that's all they talk about and think about, aren't people that you really want working in your organization. At the end of the day, you want people who do great work, who are extremely competent in their role, and they raise their head up once in a while, whatever it is, after a major product release, or after they've been working for 2 years, they raise their head up and say, all right, I've got to think about myself. But if you've got people who are constantly networking and going to lunch, I mean, I don't know who wrote that book, Never Eat Lunch Alone. It's the craziest thing. I mean, eat lunch alone, read a newspaper at lunch. If all you're doing is going to lunch with random people, you're out of your mind. So I think competence in your role, really demonstrating that you are committed and doing a great job, and leadership in your role are the two things that will set you up really well in that sense. And it's probably worth noting that leadership, I mean, occasionally people, not so much in my current role, but at HP I'd have junior people say, well, how can I show leadership if I'm only, whatever, a, contributing engineer? And, that is a mentality that you have to break through very quickly. You can demonstrate leadership at any level of an organization, any level. If you can't figure out how to demonstrate leadership, then you need to find a new organization, or you need to retool yourself quickly and say, I've got to have a new mindset. So competence and demonstrated leadership, I think, are two things that will make you interesting in that transition.
And I agree with that, not just from those of you where you went off and did something like an entrepreneur opportunity, but even if you had a stumble or you tried something, you went in a little different direction, make that connection for people. And you should be able to articulate that. I actually took a severance from Gap, and that was hard, and I took 2 years off between Gap and starting at Pete's, and that was hard to explain. So I think that from the recruiting side, we're actually also recruiting for the director of social responsibility at Pete's, and that hasn't been a career for people for very long, right? It's not, some people go way back, but more on the environmental side, but as a career, it's very much of the last 5 to 10 years. So they're able to make those connections of how they had the transferable skills and how they continue to build and how those skills relate to what I'm looking for now. And I think that it's that ability to articulate that in a confident way that will make the difference, whatever transition, whatever the reasons why you're making the changes you are.
Yeah, and that actually goes off I love all the questions now. That actually goes off the Pandora story, too, when he was talking about communication. So the other thing I highly recommend is the power of storytelling. If you haven't thought about it or honed it, there's a lot of great online talks. Nancy Duarte, is anyone familiar with her? She has the power of storytelling. It's a visual. She did Al Gore's Academy Award-winning, demo on the climate change. But just learning how to tell your own story is really important, both for as you think about transitions, how do you package yourself, and then within an organization, how do you sell your ideas and influence, because that hierarchy is dead. Okay, questions all over the place.
I have a question kind of the other way around. So sometimes career transitions are moving into industries that you're not necessarily familiar with.
Right.
So you're going from one industry, and sometimes lateral transitions are, I really don't like this industry, I want to move into a completely different industry.
Yes.
When you've had the P&L and general manager experience, my situation is that I run a $30 million company, small company, but I have P&L, I oversee all functional areas of the company. When you move to another area, you're likely not going to start at that company as the head of that company.
Yep.
So when you move to a new role, how do you package yourself as having line experience, functional area experience in any given thing? I oversee all parts of my company, finance, sales and marketing, operations, technology. There's not a part of it that doesn't report to me. But I'm a generalist. I am a general manager. And so what I found is my trouble communicating is how I can now say, okay, well now I know I've been a general manager for 5 years, but really my strength is sales and marketing, or really it's operations. And so what are your experiences and how do you find packaging yourself, and maybe what is some of your risk if you're not done transitioning now that you are a GM?
I think that depends. I mean, it's hard because you get resumes and it's like, wow, they're totally, they don't, not even the consumer space at all. It's hard for us looking at B2B folks in marketing when we're looking for B2C. But I think that to the extent that you can help, again, they don't see the connections. So I don't know enough at the top levels whether you can make that lateral in a completely different industry at a general manager level. But we're actually at this job we're recruiting for right now, the director of social responsibility. There's only one person that has coffee experience, and coffee is agricultural products very different than jeans. We have lots of different backgrounds. We have a technology person coming in, and again, it's how do you do your due diligence and figuring out if this is the industry you want to go into. I went from apparel to food and beverage. I did a ton of research on the industry, and I was able to articulate what the similarities were and how my whatever particular experience I had would help them, because I was coming with fresh eyes on it. And it's like maybe it's targeting the right companies that are in that growth stage. And one of the reasons, other than loving Pete's, and it took me a long time to get in there, I knew they had just hired a CMO. I knew that they were looking for marketing people, and I knew that she didn't have any experience in retail. So how do I leverage that? I knew that she needed help figuring out how to put her team together. So, that's, I don't know what industries you're trying, how big of a jump it is. But on the subject of kind of going from a generalist to a specialist, I think that you have to be able to articulate why. Not that just I'm good at this, and I've been deep in it. They can probably see that on your resume or not. But why? Because I'd say, well, why was he a general manager? Now he wants to go into sales again. What is it about it that is driving this guy that he would want to make that change? And it's tough because, as a hiring manager, I have to ask to get the cover letter, right? So you write these great cover letters, and the hiring managers don't always get them because of technology. I happen to ask to get them because I find that cover letter tells me something about how they think. So to the extent that you can, big cover letters are great, but that you can get an in from somebody else that has saying, hey, I've met this guy before. He is a strategic thinker. He gets sales. He gets it. If you can use the Haas network or any other network you have to get that insight. I'm always amazed at people who come in and say they know somebody who sits next to me and have not reached out to them. I feel like, wow, you didn't do your homework. You know this person, you didn't ask for the lay of the land. You don't have to tell them, they don't have to tell you the company's secrets. It's just the lay of the land. And I actually remember one of the people that when I got the job offer, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm going to take this job. It was a step back for me. I took a pay cut and a title. Step back. And she was able to say, your boss high fives people. Are you okay with it? It's just invaluable. So I think that and she does still high five people. It's not what I do. But I think that you got to kind of walk in the shoes of somebody in that company if you're going to make that kind of leap. And you're going to have to convince them that you can make that change, that you're willing, because they might say, why is this guy taking a step back? I was able, through talking to the people that were already at Pete's, to put it in terms that they could understand, and help make the connections between what I learned in apparel and a big company. That was the other thing I was up against. Time after time did not get jobs because I only had big company experience. And having to convince somebody that, yes, I worked for a big company, but I was one of two people that started the website. And helping them understand what that looked like and what I learned from it and how I could translate that to the problems they have. A lot of it was around figuring out what was going on at Pete's at that time that I feel was the reason why I was able to get in. So,
John, you see a lot of GMs. Do you see them switching industries? What are some insights?
I think degree of difficulty 9.5, right? That's I think, not to be the doom and gloom guy, but that's really what you're up against. And to the degree that you are moving domain and trying to hold your current position as a kind of GM, I think it's going to be a tough thing to do. So I think I have two pieces of advice. One is put yourself in the proximity of that domain as much as you can. So whether it's through informal networking and the like, get to know people in that domain. If you're in industry X, but you're really interested in industry Y, don't make the job search kind of a technical thing you do. Make sure you live it a little bit. But then secondly, I think the way to accomplish what you're doing is, because there's going to be pluses and minuses to you walking in as a candidate. People will, if you're trying to move from CPG to semiconductors, it's going to be really tough. If you're trying to move from CPG into consumer internet software, you're going to have an easier time because the domain is a little more transferable, right? But if it's hardcore silicon tech, it's going to be harder. The second is pick the functional area that you want to peak on and sell yourself that way. And whether that means walking in and saying, I can be your chief marketing officer, or I can be your whatever. I think it's very important to demonstrate real functional skill, because what they'll want to see is, okay, he can pick up the industry, but this person's going to be really sharp, top to bottom, understand the four walls of their function, manage empirically with the numbers. I'm going to have a really competent person at the helm there. And so I think that's part of what you have to do. And then finally, I would encourage you at some point in the process, maybe not in the beginning, but at some point in the process, when you feel like it's narrowed down to you and a few other candidates, and they're asking for your motivation, you need to be honest. You need to say, it's clear, I don't want to be in X, I want to be in Y, and I'm doing this to, for a conscious reason. And I think you'll get, frankly, more respect and credibility from having kind of laid it out there. You don't want to kind of do that in the beginning, because then it's sort of a sob story, and so nobody wants, what you want to do is kind of help, again, enlist them to help you get to your career goals by being direct with them at some point in the process.
Question.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how to manage your career in a reorganization. So both of you worked in big companies that went probably through reorgs during the time. And if you could tell us a little bit about, what to watch for, what are the pitfalls, and not just from a manager perspective, but also for an upcoming manager perspective.
That's a great question.
I'm trying to think of the reorgs I've gone through. Most recently at Pete's. The time to plan for managing through reorg is before it happens. I think that's something I didn't do well initially. We had a reorganization. There was an opportunity for me, and I was kind of heads down at that time, and it was one of those things that people didn't know my work outside of my kind of closer in sphere. So I think that's something that you should be thinking about in your career anyway. But I think if there is this, when a reorg is going on, is try to find somebody who's a mentor to you that can kind of help you understand how you fit into all that, and see if you can leverage them to help guide it. No one's going to look out for your career. I agree with that you've got to manage your own career. But I do believe that people can help you get to the place where you want to go. I mean, the reorg for us wasn't that as drastic as some where there's just massive layoffs and things like that, so I can't speak to that. Maybe John can. But there were a few layoffs, and it had to do with, constantly, it's not like actively manage your career, because you got people that do that. I agree it's your wrong focus. But I think that people who are thinking about their development, and every time they took on a new project or they asked for new work, thinking about there might be a project that wasn't quite in your area of expertise, but you would learn something else outside of it. Those people fared better during that time, but sometimes the people don't know that. So if it's in that time where they're saying, we're going to lay off, that's actually happened at Gap. That's not true. We laid off 1,500 people when I was there, and I had to lay off 3 of my team. To the extent that they were more articulate on what their goals were and how they fit in, and that they had supporters around, not just me as their boss, but supporters around, it helped them fare better. Those are just my 2 experiences with it, from more of a mid-level manager point of view at the time that I went through them.
I have a piece of advice for you, which is this the beginning of a series of reorgs, or is this a reorg to do something differently? If you're honestly, I don't know how many people in this room ever worked at Silicon Graphics or Sun, but you could have sat in those companies and known that they were toast 10 years before they were toast. The world was conspiring against them in every respect, and it does in tech in particular, and I'm speaking only to tech. Once the ball of yarn starts to unravel, it's very hard to recover. It's not always the case, but if you're in one of those situations, my advice is get out. Take the package. The first package offered is always richer than the 5th or the 6th. It's a true statement, by the way. Take the package the first time it's offered and get out. And get out, by the way, while your company still has some brand semblance around it, because there's actually some benefit to that, to you. If what you're talking about is new CEO, new leader, going to reorg the function, then I think it's a different matter, and I think the advice here is appropriate, which is find the person who can help you navigate it, communicate that you're interested in coming out of this reorg with a better role or bigger impact. But if it's the prior, exercise your freedom of movement.
And we will get in, I want to take your question next, but we will also get into, as soon as we're done with some questions, a little bit about how companies are hiring. So in terms of turmoil, in times of turmoil, there are richer times to move.
I'd ask the same question about being acquired.
So it was just announced on Thursday that my company is going to be acquired by a company 5 times as large.
So specifically, is it how do you manage your transition inside?
I mean, should I be getting out now? Should I be waiting to see what's going to happen? There's been no clear guidance on my functional area, and I don't expect it to come for some time.
So do you want the brutal, harsh truth as someone who's
That's what John's good for.
someone who's done a lot of acquiring? If you're in a functional area like finance or HR, you're toast. I mean, that's the math in big deals is almost always that the G&A function is going to be absorbed into the next one. If you're interested in staying, go find whoever your boss is early and express an interest, or at least the functional leadership in the acquiring company, and express an interest in remaining with the company and ask them, how can you impress them or whatever. And that's really how you'd have to navigate it, because what will happen is, in most cases, and I've been through 3 or 4 of these, about 70% of the acquiring companies' G&A is retained, about 30% of the acquiree companies' G&A is retained, and everybody tries to build a slightly better organization. Makes sense, but it does mean that if you're in the acquiree, you've got a 2/3 chance of being shown the door. If you're in a function that I think is really critical to the acquirer, and that usually means product management, so you have the domain expertise, they're acquiring you for that domain expertise, or you're perhaps in sales, or sales leadership, iffy, because that's part of the synergy is usually, sales leadership is out, some part of sales leadership. But if you're in one of those domains where you can say, look, I'm central to the value proposition that you acquired, then you've got a much better hand.
Right, because that's why you're being acquired.
But I think it's good to kind of keep your eyes wide open about the reality. And there will be a lot of vagueness, and there's all these communication plans because people are in there telling them about, there's always a post-merger integration office and communication plan, but you don't need to wait for that to know the truth. I'm telling you the truth here. So.
The other thing I would layer onto that is just the culture side, because one of the things that the deal guys do so well is the numbers, and then one thing that really kind of falls out is a lot of people who are acquired say, like, if it's a cool company acquiring you, you're like, right on, I want to be part of that brand, If it's not a cool company and you're not interested in the leadership, then, why? Because I think sometimes the culture clash is the one thing
that's a really excellent point. Is this a kind of an abundance transaction? I mean, if you're getting swallowed up by Facebook or Google, your world's made. You're probably going to have a job. And for most people who go from, John's website technology to a part of Facebook, that's A, a terrific financial outcome, but B, it's burnishing your resume in a big way to be working at Facebook now. But if it's a little more on the equals or even slightly distressed or taking share, consolidating share, expect the prior strategy to prevail.
So John, you mentioned that you did something very proactive. You actually went up to the boss, to the CEO, and would actually describe the position that you wanted in 18 months. So what is it that you tried to optimize for in that position? And also given that, especially in Silicon Valley, reorgs, even if the company is not in distress, happen every spring or every other season. The company changes a lot, and of course, a lot of new functions appear. How specific were you about what it is that you wanted? And did you look for positions that already exist, or did you invent new positions and ensure that they would come about in 18 months?
It's a good question. If you're too specific, then you're not giving that person enough flexibility to really help you, right? I mean, if you say, I want that job, and the implication of that is, the person in that job has to be out, it's only slightly better than holding a gun and saying, I want that, right? If, however, you say, this is the profile of a job that I would like, then you give them substantially more flexibility to put you, and it may not quite work. I've had a couple where, frankly, you know, I got the call and everyone was happy and it was all I could do to kind of put a smile on my face, because it wasn't exactly what I had imagined it would be, because everyone builds a little vision of the perfect job, but it worked out. Got me that next step, got me a new set of experiences. It was a line role. So don't constrain it too tightly. That's the mistake, I think. You have to describe the profile of the role you want, and then you have to be ready for serendipity, fate.
And I think the other thing is that to the extent that you're changing a functional area in that, so it may not just be that you want the next level up, or what I did when I knew that I was in product management, I was too far away from it, I was working on real-time credit authorization. Like, oh my God, what am I doing here? This isn't, I was very good at it, but I wasn't happy, and that's not a good place to be, by the way. I went to the CEO and I said, I have an idea. We are making decisions about our website, about real-time credit authorization, for matter of fact, that we have no idea what the customer thinks. We don't talk to the customer, and we can't talk to the customer in the traditional marketing research ways. It's a whole new world that we're dealing with. And it was just at the beginning of, now there's like huge teams of usability experts and customer experience departments. And we didn't even have a market research department at Gap Incorporated, let alone one in a division. And she said, you know what? I understand what you're saying. I can't fund that as a position. But if you want to take that on, I'm willing to listen. So I taught myself how to moderate focus groups. I taught myself about usability. I went to every free seminar on interface design. And I, within a month and a half, had gotten their attention of the leadership team, presented back my results, and they said, okay, it's good, still got to do your day job, but take it a little bit further. And this was actually where I was in business school. I was part of the evening program, and it was very helpful because that problem framing skill, thank goodness for Professor Katz, because he had just taken one of, I don't know what case study they had done, it's like, oh my God, that's how I'm going to frame it for them. And yeah, it's a very expensive way to get that framing advice. But I think that you can do that you can show that you have that potential by taking on a stretch project, whether it exists or not, or volunteering to be a part of a group that you're not normally a part of. Why am I I'm at the executive level of interviewing for the director of social responsibility. It has nothing to do with my job. But it's because of the relationships I built and my interest in the area that's gotten me much more visibility with the leadership team, because I'm now in the lineup with them. So when we debrief, I'm with them. And they're now seeing me in a different light because of that. I'm able to contribute to that. And those are little things, and there's big things. But that's another way to just trying to get yourself recognized in a different way. They see you in a different light because of that. So it worked for me.
In your experience, do you find that marketing people succeed in high finance and making that transition?
Actually, they do. It used to not be the case at Gap, because it was only the merchants that made it to the senior positions, but there are quite a few people that are actually presidents of divisions now that are marketing. But they're marketing in a more classical sense. And marketing is one of those things like it's really sexy. It's not really. It's a lot about pricing and promotion strategies, all those things you learn in business school that are very business oriented. So people who've come up that side of marketing, and a lot of times they've come up the rank of sales and marketing organizations where they're kind of hand in hand, work more closely. I've seen them very successful at becoming general managers. There's another side of marketing which is more on the advertising side of it, or on the media side of it, and those folks tend not to go into more of the general management roles. Which is why I have to make this decision pretty soon. So check back in a few years and see where I landed.
I have a question. So I'm listening to your story, and I think about my career too. And when I was younger, it's always been I need to get this, 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 and this. And transitions, take a lot of energy and drain a lot of creativity out of people, right? So how do you keep going? Because when you're younger, that's just part of your your genetic makeup. You want to do something, you want to keep achieving, and you come to a certain point. How do you keep that hunger?
You know, I decided as I get older, all new things suck, right? I don't like my new car. I don't like my new house. It takes me longer and longer to like something new. My wife teases me because I buy clothes and then they sit in the closet and steep or age for a while I decide that I'll try this new thing. It's an odd way to answer your question, I'm sure. I feel your pain, I think, is what I'm saying. Each time you make a transition, you have to rebuild equity. There's a big upfront investment in rebuilding your equity. And that's when you talk about the pain and the energy required, that's what we're talking about here. And so I think by the way, you don't have to have it become like me and have it affect the rest of your life, but I think the challenge is to find the right pace of transitions and still acknowledge that you're going to have to do some transitions. And this, I think, gets to the issue of career management and pacing. Quite frankly, I think if you change too much, you're not benefiting from the roles you're in, and you're probably not drinking deeply enough of the environment you're in and learning from what you're doing. But if you don't change enough, then you start to stagnate. And there's a rhythm to it that I think is kind of appropriate. And I mean, you guys are the experts, but when we scan a resume, if we see too much, then we're nervous and concerned about their ability to really dig in deeply on a particular role and a particular thing. If we see too little movement, then we're concerned about their ability to reorganize themselves personally and grow themselves and take on the risks. And so I think you have to find that rhythm, and I do think you're right. As you get older, you can make that rhythm a little bit longer to manage the energy, but you still just have to brace for it. And I don't have any easy answer, except that certainly when I've done it and when I talk to colleagues who are doing it, is you really have to kind of circle that first year. If you're joining an organization, and you should think in terms of 3 to 5 years. If it doesn't work out, clearly you can leave before that, but you should think in terms of that kind of time frame. You should think in terms of that first year as being a pretty heavy investment year. Heavy in terms of the time you put into it and everything else. And there's no way around it.
And we're at our close, so I'll just leave a couple of parting thoughts, which is, I don't know if anyone's seen the book Drive by Daniel Pink, but there's a wonderful YouTube video that's only 10 minutes long, and it's a visual, one of those graphic recorders who draws pictures while he's talking, so you see what he's saying. It's really quite cool. And it's about, what drives us, and it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so as you think about how you feed your energy, he has some great examples there that you can just sort of digest in 10 minutes. There's also a great resource called The Energy Project, and they talk about managing your energy more than managing your time. So there's sort of this idea, especially in Silicon Valley, that like working a 12-hour day is 2 hours more productive than working a 10-hour day. And yet when you really look at creativity and innovation and how good work gets done, it's a fallacy. So how do you think about interval training? It's more like a sprint. You think of yourself more as like a corporate athlete where you do your best work in 90-minute intervals, and then you need to have some sort of break. And think of, as you think of ourselves a little bit more holistically when we get older, I think we have to. So some of those resources are out there that I think also was sort of an echo to the Pandora story this morning, which he was like, academia has a lot to offer, entrepreneur and business has a lot to offer, and then there are these gaps. So to the extent that you're here today, I would say you guys are definitely, business people who are trying to continue to stay connected to the social science, but, stay rich with that. I think there's a lot of good resources in managing your energy through transitions, which is really critical because you need to bring that energy into the next organization or they're going to feel it, right? So thank you guys for coming. I was thrilled that we didn't even get to all our questions because I really wanted to get to your questions, and I'll let you eat. Thank you. I love love that we didn't get to the question. Like, that's exactly like. Thank you. Thank you. Good.